Okay, thank you very much. I'd like to start by thanking Femke and the organisational committee for inviting me to give this keynote today. So I want to talk this morning about some work that I've done over the last, work that I've led over the last 5 years or so. It started when I was a postdoc in Munich, funded through the DFG Eminence program, and it's work that we've been continuing at the University of Birmingham since I moved back in 2013, and we've been lucky enough to be funded through the Marie Curie Actions. This is very much work that I've been doing together with two of my recent PhD students, Martin Descura and Roland Sukius here. So this is the three of us travelling around the world collecting data on this important group of reptiles, the Archosauromorphs. This is us in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Moscow, ignoring sauropods, they're not very interesting in Calcutta, and this is in Beijing. And what we've been interested in is really understanding the major faunal transition that we see between the late Permian and the late Triassic. So over about 50 million years of Earth history, we go through from ecosystems that are dominated by synapses, as well as parareptiles during the late Permian, to by the end of the Triassic, we have ecosystems globally that are dominated by archosaurs in the form of dinosaurs, pterosaurs, crocodilomorphs and their kin. This is really one of the major faunal transitions that we see on land in Earth history, and it's got a lot of attention historically. Most of the work that's been done on understanding this faunal transition has focused on possibly the most charismatic. I would disagree, but most people think the most charismatic part of this radiation, which are the dinosaurs. More recently, people have focused on the crown group, Archosauria, which includes crocodilians, birds, dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and various other extinct lineages. But what we've been focusing on is the fact that this is actually only one part of a much broader radiation of reptiles called Archosauromorphs. So Archosauromorphs include archosaurs, but they also include all extinct species that are more closely related to archosaurs than they are to lizards, snakes, and Lepidosauromorphs. So there's a whole range of extinct stem lineage members of Archosauromorpha lying here outside of the crown group. And this is really part of this faunal transition has been completely neglected over the last 20 years or so of work, really. So these non-archosaurian archosauromorphs, these stem archosaurs, are actually extremely diverse. So they come from the late Permian to late Triassic. We have somewhere around about 95 to 100 valid species that we recognise at present. They represent a diversity of different major groups, many of which are really strange-looking animals. So we have these bizarre pig-like herbivores that are very important in middle and late Triassic ecosystems, and the rhynchosaurs. We have these superficially crop-like animals, the protozoans, which have bizarre down-turned premaxillae that I'll show in more detail in a couple of slides' time. We have these big-headed Komodo dragon-like animals, the Erythrosuphids, some of the earliest apex predators among Archosauromorphs. And then we have these truly bizarre, long-necked marine taxa, Telestrophiids. So it's a really morphologically and ecologically diverse assemblage of taxa that's very important, particularly during the Triassic, but until recently it's been extremely poorly understood, completely neglected. People focus much more on dinosaurs and on the crown group archosaurs. So the goals of the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years have really been to try and reassess the fossil record, the taxonomy, the diversity and phylogenetics of this assemblage of non-archosaurian archosauromorphs. We then wanted to try and understand the major shifts and changes and events that took place during the early radiation of Archosauromorphs through the late Permian to middle Triassic. To do that, we've basically been travelling a lot, collecting data from collections worldwide, pretty much examined all of the key Archosauromorph taxa from this time interval in a very diverse range of countries around the world, working with lots of different colleagues. We've been carrying out extensive anatomical and taxonomic revisions. We've published quite a few of those already. We've got a lot more still to do. We've also been working on describing some new species. We've been carrying out new phylogenetic analyses to give us a framework to understand the evolution of this group. So we've done these at a variety of scales, some at very wide scales to understand the broad framework, and then some very detailed analyses of individual clades. And the most recent part of what we're doing is kind of building on all this anatomical phylogenetic data, is trying to actually quantify some of the patterns. So I'll talk a little bit about this at the end of the talk. It's ongoing work, but we're currently doing a lot of quantitative macroevolutionary work, looking at things like disparity in rhizomatophy change through time. So I'm not going to talk too much about the phylogeny today. Our main framework for understanding early Archosauromorph phylogeny has come out of Martin Escura's PhD. So Martin completed his PhD last year. He's now back in Argentina in a permanent position at the CONICET. He completed a monumental phylogenetic analysis as part of his PhD. Published earlier this year in PeerJ. You might have seen it if you're interested in Archosaurs. It's something like 400 pages long. Includes close to 100 taxa, 600 characters. I'd point out this is just one chapter of Martin's PhD. It's a fairly phenomenal piece of work to have to read as a PhD supervisor. But this provides us with our framework for understanding Archosauromorph evolution. This is a simplified version of the phylogeny, basically showing the relationships between major groups of early Archosauromorphs. So we have crown Archosaurs down here at the bottom, dinosaurs somewhere in here. We have Telestrophids right down at the base of Archosauromorpha, pretty much the most basal group of Archosauromorphs. Rhynchosaurs here, we've got Proterosuchids, Erythrosuchids, there's a big group of things called Proterochampsids, and some close related taxa here. We have Euparchia, which is a very well-known taxon there. So this is the framework we're using to try and understand how Archosauromorphs radiated through their initial diversification. So what I want to do is I want to kind of give you a qualitative overview of the early Archosauromorph radiation. And I'm going to divide it into three different distinct phases and talk a little bit about what happened in those phases and what might have caused those different phases of the diversification. So the start of the Archosauromorph radiation begins in the Permian, with the origins of the group. So what do we know of Permian Archosauromorphs? Well, not really very much, to be honest. We published a paper together with Torsten Scheer a couple of years ago, kind of reviewing all of the Permian records. We do have one fantastic taxon of the Permian Archosauromorph, which is this animal, Proterosaurus, which comes from the early late Permian of England and Germany. All of the best specimens from Germany, just a few specimens from the UK. I think this specimen is a cast specimen downstairs in the museum. It's quite a well-known specimen. It's a beautiful specimen that has pretty much complete articulated skeleton. And this is an animal that we really can understand quite well. We have a lot of material, it's very nicely preserved, very complete, and it's our best picture on understanding early Archosauromorph evolution in the Permian. After Proterosaurus, we really have very, very little from the Permian at all. So this is another taxon from the Permian that you might have heard of, Archosaurus rossicus from Russia. This comes from the very, very end of the Permian, from the end of the Changxingyuan, just prior to the Permo-Triassic mass extinction. And this is about all we've got of it, to be honest. We've got, this is a premaxilla. It's not complete, so the nares is there. It's missing its teeth. But it has a very distinctive downturned morphology, quite a high tooth count. It's pretty much indistinguishable from the premaxillae of a very distinctive group of early Triassic Archosauromorphs Proterosuchids. And it's certainly a member of that group, so quite deeply nested within Archosauromorphs. Historically, Andrei Senekhov and other people have referred additional specimens to this taxon, but we're not sure that any of those can be really assigned with confidence. So at the moment, we don't know much about this taxon beyond the holotype specimen. When we visited Moscow a couple of years back, we had a look at this specimen. This is described in the late 90s by Andrei Senekhov. Consists of several vertebrae. So we've got a couple of neck vertebrae here. There's a few fragments of ribs and limb elements as well. It's pretty small. Andrei named it as a taxon called Eosaurus. It comes from the late middle to early late Permian of Russia, and it had been pretty much completely ignored since Andrei described it. So Andrei thought it was something to do with Proterosaurs, so some kind of basal Archosauromorph. Everybody ignored this paper. I think they weren't even aware that this paper had been published, really, to be honest. When we re-examined it, we were able to identify a number of very clear Archosauromorph features in it. It has very distinct, well-developed laminae and fossae in the neural arch. The development of which is unique to Archosauromorphs. We do see similar features in some non-Archosauromorph taxa, but they're never quite the same or as well developed. And actually it seems to be quite deeply nested within Archosauromorphs, despite being possibly the oldest Archosauromorph taxon we know of. So again, it's a taxon we don't have much material, but it is potentially telling us something about the timing of Archosauromorph diversification. And then the last Archosauromorph taxon that we know from the Permian was actually discovered way back in the early part of the 20th century, published in 1956 by Rex Harrington, who was a well-known British paleontologist at the University of Cambridge. And this comes from southwestern Tanzania, from a formation called the Asili Formation, which is early late Permian in age. Rex Harrington wasn't really sure what to make of this material, so he wasn't sure if it belonged to what he called thecodonts, so something related to Archosauromorphs, like Proterosuchus, or if it could be a synapsid of some kind, a pentasaur. So he just referred to it as a problematic reptile, and he didn't give it a name. We had a look at this material. Again, this paper has been largely ignored, but we had a look at the material in Cambridge a couple of years ago, borrowed it, did some histological work with Thorsten Scher and a bunch of other stuff. Again, it's pretty limited. We have a number of vertebrae, so this is one of the vertebrae in various views. This is a distal end of the humerus, and with a couple of other bits of limb bones. It has a very unusual combination of characters, which is why Harrington was so puzzled by it. So it still has an open notochordal canal in all of the vertebrae, which is something we don't see in other Archosauromorphs, with possibly one or two exceptions. But it has a number of Archosauromorph-like features. So it has these very strongly developed laminae fossing on the neural arches. It lacks entaepicondylar and epicondylar foramina on the distal end of the humerus. It has a very strongly developed olecranon process on the ulna, and a bunch of other things. And so actually, when you feed this into a phylogenetic analysis, it comes out as the most basal Archosauromorph taxon. So though it's very incompletely known, it might be the earliest or the most basal Archosauromorph that we have to date. This is a reconstruction of this animal. So we named this animal as Enigmastropheus harringtoni, Harrington's enigmatic vertebrate. And this is a reconstruction of it in the foreground here as a kind of a lizard-like animal with Gorgonopsians and Dicynodonts in the back of this Permian scene. So this is the paleobiogeographical distribution of Archosauromorphs during the late Permian. Until we described Enigmastropheus a couple of years back, basically all we knew of Archosauromorphs in the Permian was limited to this relatively small area of northern Pangaea, so European Russia here and Central Europe, the UK and Germany. So there had been this idea that Archosaurus were perhaps very geographically restricted prior to the PT mass extinction. And Enigmastropheus changes that a little bit, so it suggests a broader distribution on Pangaea of Archosauromorphs. And actually, I think there's potentially more material coming out from southern Pangaea in the near future that will support that as well. So the general picture seems to be that Archosauromorphs were not very diverse in the Permian. We don't have many specimens, but they were perhaps quite widespread in terms of their biogeographic distribution. If we look at phylogeny, so this is Martin's phylogeny, calibrated up to the stratigraphic record, and I highlight the Permian Archosauromorph part of this tree, so you can ignore everything over on the left here. We have Enigmastropheus and Protorosaurus right down at the base of Archosauromorpha here. We have the Orosaurus from Russia, possibly up somewhere close to Archosauriformes, which is what historically people called Archosaurs before we started using the Crown definition. And we have Archosaurus here within the Proterosuchus. And the thing to note from this, I mean, you're not going to see much of the details here, but the thing to note is that there must have been a lot of diversification of Archosauromorphs prior to the PT mass extinction. The fact particularly that Archosaurus and the Orosaurus are quite deeply nested really implies that there was major phylogenetic diversification. And actually a lot of these lineages then cross the PT boundary. So it seems that we have a cryptic diversification of Archosauromorphs in the Permian. We're not really picking that up in the fossil record at the moment. Maybe we're not sampling the right areas, maybe they were so rare that we're not sampling them. And then a lot of those lineages, like Teylers, like Rhynchosaurs, like Archosauriformes, various other lineages, cross the boundary. So we don't think at this stage that there was a dramatic impact of PT extinction on Archosauromorphs. We don't know for certain, but it doesn't seem like they suffered based on the very little data that we have available. The next phase in Archosauromorph diversification is basically what happens immediately after the PT mass extinction. So we have this huge mass extinction event at the boundary between the Permian and the Triassic. And we have a very different record of Archosauromorphs immediately after that event. So if we go to earliest Triassic assemblages worldwide, we found a lot more Archosauromorph fossils. So the place where we have the best record of the recovery from the mass extinction is South Africa, the Karoo Basin. And in the Karoo Basin, we have a very good record of proterosuchids, this group that I already mentioned, of superficially crocodile-like animals with a very strongly down-turned premaxilla. We don't have huge numbers of specimens, but we have about 14 specimens, all referable to the taxon called Proterosuchus, and they include some beautifully preserved complete skeletons, complete skulls. All of them, interestingly, come from a very, very narrow stratigraphic range above the PTE boundary. So we don't have any Archosauromorphs in the Permian of South Africa at all, despite it being a very intensively studied and sampled sequence of rocks. And then we get Proterosuchus within 5 meters of the mass extinction. But it only occurs between 5 and 14 meters above the Permo-Triassic boundary. This is what some of the Proterosuchus material looks like, some beautifully preserved specimens with a nice range of different sizes. So the scale bar here is 5 centimeters in each case, so you've got skulls ranging from about maybe 20 centimeters in length up to kind of 50 to 60 centimeters in length. This has allowed us to do some interesting work on ontogeny and heterochrony that I don't really have time to talk about. But it's beautiful material. And when we look at this in detail, there's been a lot of historical kind of discussion about the number of taxa that this material represents. We think we can pull apart 3 different species based upon this assemblage material. Most of it seems to be referable to a single species called Proterosuchus fergusi, but there are a couple of specimens which fall outside of the range of variation that we see within that species. One of which historically was given the name Proterosuchus alexanderi, so we've resurrected that. And then a third one which we named for Dave Gower, who's done a lot of work historically on Proterosuchus and Erythrosuchus. So these, although there are 3 species, you can see that they are very similar morphologically to one another. And that's the general pattern of what we see in the early Triassic for Archosauromorphs. We see a great increase in abundance, we see more species, so the diversity increases, but they all look very similar to one another. So we can go to China, and we see Archosauromorph specimens in the early Triassic rocks. We haven't got them in the Permian rocks. We have quite nice preservation. This is a skull, an articulated skeleton of a Proterosuchid. This is the front of the skull of a Proterosuchid. Bizarre down-turned premaxilla. Seems to be specifically distinct from the Proterosuchus we have in South Africa, but it's very, very similar in its overall morphology. So we're not seeing a great increase in disparity here. We did some fieldwork last year in the Panchak formation of northeastern India, together with Jaruti Sengupta and other colleagues from the Indian Statistical Institute in Kolkata. So this is Roland and Martin in the field collecting specimens. This is earliest Triassic, similar in age to the Lystrosaurus assemblage zone in South Africa. And what did we find? Well, we found lots of Lystrosaurus material, we find lots of temnospondyl material. We also find Proterosuchus, and we find actually relatively commonly isolated bones of Proterosuchus. So for example, we have this is a historically collected specimen actually of a lower jaw, but we have some specimens that we found, so humerus and vertebrate. We actually have most of the skeleton represented by isolated bones there. And again, it's very, very similar to the Proterosuchus that we see in South Africa, and it seems to be specifically distinct from them. We go to other parts of the world, we also find an increase in the number of Archosauromorph specimens in the early Triassic. So we see Polocerta in South Africa and Antarctica, very similar animals also occur in Australia. We see this animal, Tasmaniasaurus from Tasmania, Notosuchus, an early Rhynchosaur, which comes from South Africa. Earlier this year, some Brazilian colleagues and myself described this animal from the earliest Triassic of Brazil to Teylers, based on this beautifully preserved skull, again coming from Lystrosaurus assemblage zone rocks. If you've looked at all of these different animals, the skulls, what you'll notice is that although there is an increase in the diversity of these animals in terms of numbers of species, they all look pretty much the same. So they don't all form a group, but they form a grade of animals that are morphologically very, very similar to one another. So we're seeing an increase in diversity in the early Triassic, but not necessarily a major increase in disparity in morphological diversity. And Proterosuchus in particular are pretty interesting because they seem to have this increase in diversity, but they do it for a very short-lived period of time. So we only have Proterosuchus for maybe just a few 100,000 years after the mass extinction event. It's very similar actually to the pattern we see for Lystrosaurus, which is a very, very famous disaster taxon that flourishes after the PT mass extinction. It's very common and abundant worldwide, but only survives for a very short stratigraphic interval. So we would argue that Proterosuchus is effectively operating in a similar way. It's a disaster taxon that flourishes and succeeds for a very short interval of time after the PT mass extinction, probably as a response to the vacant ecospace that is opened up by that mass extinction event. So the next major kind of change that we see in the early diversification of Archosauromorphs occurs around the boundary between the early and the middle Triassic, between the Olinecan and the Eocene, and here things start to really get interesting. So we see a major increase in diversity, in abundance, in body size, but also critically in disparity, so morphological diversity. So as we see the first representatives of these big-headed apex predators, the Erythroseuchids, this beautiful skull of Garenia from the latest Olinecan of Russia. Dave Gower and myself and colleagues described a jugal of a South African taxon that we described a couple of years ago. There's a new species of Garenia. There's a huge boss on the lateral surface of the jugal. So we get these big apex predators beginning to appear at the boundary between the early and middle Triassic. We get the first crown archosaurs, and they're pretty weird looking animals. So this is a historically collected specimen called Teylers that a bunch of us redescribed a few years back. It consists of a series of vertebrae from the neck through to the base of the tail, and has these bizarre elongate neural spines on the vertebrae. So it has a sail on its back. And we see more of these sail-backed crown archosaurs as we move into the earliest middle Triassic, into the Eocene. So we see something very similar from the early Eocene of southwest USA. We also see huge diversity of other things. So Erythroseuchids get up to giant sizes. So this is Erythroseuchus africanus, which is a skull probably getting up to maybe 1 meter 20, 1 meter 30 in length. It's the first really truly giant apex predator among Archosauromorphs. We have very small, perhaps insectivorous taxa like Euparchierids. We have the first herbivores, the rhynchosaurs, such as Mysticetus from the early Eocene. And we have the first of these marine Tanystrophiid taxa with these incredibly elongated necks. So things are starting to get really ecologically interesting among Archosauromorphs at this point. We're starting to see them evolve into the marine realm, to start to take on novel ecological strategies like herbivory, and to become much more morphologically diverse. So what's going on? What's happening at the boundary between the early and middle Triassic? Well, after the mass extinction, we have this interval through the early Triassic, which is characterized by a very, very unstable carbon cycle. We see huge fluctuations in the carbon cycle before it stabilizes somewhere around the early to middle Triassic boundary. We also have globally high temperatures, and we have a well-known coal gap. So we don't have coal-bearing units in the early Triassic, and this has been suggested to be related to a reduction in primary productivity. And generally the picture that people suggested is that we have an interval of very unstable global ecosystems, with perhaps a series of continued smaller scale extinctions occurring throughout the early Triassic. And then we have a stabilization in ecosystems at about the early to middle Triassic boundary. So maybe this is when ecosystems really start to recover from the PT mass extinction, and maybe that's why we really start to see Archosauromorphs take off, ultimately leading to the success of crown archosaurs and dinosaurs through the rest of the Triassic and on through the Mesozoic. If we look at our phylogenies again, we map up the stratigraphy, we can see that the early occurrence of crown archosaurs like Teylers means that we have to have a major, substantial amount of diversification occurring in the early Triassic during the Indian and the Olinecan. And like the picture for the Permian, we're really not picking that up at present, so it's not being sampled well at the moment in the fossil record. That might be due to the very unstable nature of early Triassic ecosystems. So this is a figure from a paper by Randy Ernest and Jessica Whiteside from a few years back when they attempted to look at the evenness of terrestrial vertebrate communities in South Africa from the late Permian through to the middle Triassic. So evenness here is shown in blue. And what's characteristic about the early Triassic is you have incredibly uneven ecosystems. Evenness is very low. That means that a small number of taxa overwhelmingly dominate the ecosystem, particularly Lystrosaurus. And this actually creates a very unstable ecosystem that's very prone to kind of catastrophic collapse. And then evenness recovers around the early to middle Triassic boundary as we go into the Eocene. What this also means is that if you've got just a small number of taxa that are very common, Other taxa within that ecosystem are exceptionally rare and probably unlikely to be fossilized. So it might be that this Archosaur and Archosauromorph radiation that our phylogeny suggests is occurring in the early Triassic, we're not picking up because it's occurring at the very, very rare end of this evenness spectrum. Okay, just for the last couple of minutes or so, I just want to talk about some of the ongoing work that we're doing trying to quantify some of these patterns. So pretty much everything I've said to you has been a kind of a qualitative assessment of the data based upon our taxonomic and phylogenetic work. We're trying to quantify this in various ways at the moment. So some work that's currently in review is together with Christian Foast, who was talking yesterday about internal disparity through time. This is work that we began when we were in Munich, working together with Christian. Basically, we're using cranial morphometrics as a way to try and estimate disparity and disparity changes through the Archosauromorph radiation. So we've sampled 73 late Permian to early Jurassic Archosauromorph species. We've got a variety of landmarks and semi-landmarks that we've plotted onto skull reconstructions from all these species. We've subjected these as geometric morphometrics, and then we're using the principal component scores to estimate disparity and disparity change through time. And we're also reconstructing hypothetical ancestors to try and fill in some of the missing gaps in the fossil record. And just to cut a long story short, it's currently in review at BMT Evolutionary Biology, so hopefully it'll be out before too long, with a basic picture of what we see in terms of how disparity changes through this radiation is that across the PT boundary, we don't see really a significant change in disparity. It's more or less flat. So we do see this change in the fossil record of Archosauromorphs, where they become much more abundant, we have more species, but the disparity really doesn't change. We then see a really significant increase in disparity from the early Triassic into the middle Triassic. And that coincides with this interval of recovery of terrestrial ecosystems from the PT mass extinction. That then continues into the late Triassic, when we have a peak in Archosauromorph disparity in the late Triassic. And actually, that's higher than even in the early Jurassic. So Archosauromorphs are really fantastically diverse at this point. Go on to the next part of this work, which is together with Martin Escura. We're trying to get at this same question, how disparity change through the Archosauromorph radiation using a different type of data. So this is now focusing rather on morphometric data, it's focusing on more discrete morphological characters. So essentially taking the data from Martin's phylogenetic data set, expanding it, and using that as a way to estimate morphological variation through time. So we have expanded this data set to include now close to 670 characters. We've sampled every single valid species from the late Permian through to the early late Triassic. And we've just started to try and quantify how some of the disparity changes through time. So this is very, very provisional, preliminary results, as we just did this a couple of weeks ago. But we're seeing similar patterns to what we found from cranial morphometrics. We see very little disparity change. The disparity change is shown here in red across the Permo-Triassic boundary and into the early Triassic. And then a really significant, substantial increase in disparity as we go into the middle Triassic, which is then continued as we go later on into the Triassic. So this again fits with this idea of this Archosauromorph radiation being linked to this kind of stabilization of ecosystems across the early to middle Triassic boundary. And then the very last thing that I want to talk about very briefly is work that we're doing together with my postdoc, David Butler, which is focusing on biogeographical patterns. And we're building on a method that was proposed by Chris Seedor a few years back called network biogeography. So basically this is a way of testing how endemic or cosmopolitan faunas are through time. And it's basically views biogeography in a network framework, so it uses areas as these nodes. Taxa then are linked to individual areas, and they can be linked, you can have links between taxa which are present in more than one area. So in this network here, these are three areas, so it's like South Africa, South America, and North America, and you have a taxon that's present in all three of those areas and links them together, whereas these other taxa, shown in the other colours, are just present in one area. And you use this then as a way to quantify how kind of densely connected a network is, how well connected different geographic areas are within a time interval, and how that changes through time. It doesn't incorporate phylogeny in any way, which is a major weakness, because actually you might have, this might be a different taxon to this one, but they might be sister taxons, so very closely related, very similar, and you might want to incorporate that information. So we've been working on a kind of a variation on Seedor's method that does allow us to incorporate phylogeny, and allows us to basically build these much more complex networks, and we weight links according to the phylogenetic distance between taxa. So we're able to also incorporate much more data and to apply this at a global scale. So Seedor only was able to do this really at a local scale for southern Pangaea. We've been able to apply this to a global data set. So this has allowed us, basically, we've compiled data for more than 1,000 amniote species, including Archosauromorphs, including our Archosauromorph phylogeny that we've been working on, a number of different biogeographic areas, for data spanning from the late Permian through to the early Jurassic. And it basically, this is a measure of biogeographical connectedness through time, which is a measure of how, essentially how cosmopolitan or how endemic global faunas are. So when you've got high biogeographical connectedness, as you have here, you've got very cosmopolitan faunas, very similar worldwide, and you've got very low connectedness, you've got very endemic faunas. And the general pattern that we see is something that people have suggested kind of qualitatively before, but has never really been quantified. And we see this major increase in cosmopolitanism across the Permo-Triassic boundary. So we see this really kind of cosmopolitan fauna in the early Triassic, consistent with this idea of a global disaster fauna. That is kind of maintained into the middle Triassic, then decays into the late Triassic. And then we see something again that's quite similar after the Triassic-Jurassic mass extinction. But it's less pronounced, perhaps because this is a less extreme extinction event. So this is work that the data is going to be presenting at a couple of meetings this year. We're hoping to write up in the next couple of months or so. Okay, so just to finish up, so Archosauromorphs originated and they became phylogenetically diverse in the late Permian, but we have very, very few specimens at present. So they were rare and they had low disparity. If we move into the earliest Triassic, we have this morphologically conservative radiation of proterosuchids and morphologically similar taxa that form a short-lived disaster radiation. We then have another kind of cryptic diversification of Archosauromorphs and crown archosaurs in the early Triassic that we're not really picking up very well at the moment in the fossil record. We then see this major increase in disparity, diversity, body size, and so on across the early to middle Triassic boundary. Really sets the scene for the diversification of crown archosaurs and dinosaurs in the middle and late Triassic. And this seems to coincide with the proposed recovery of terrestrial ecosystems following the instability of the early Triassic. So lots of people to thank. Thank you all for listening, and thanks again for the invitation to speak today.